Hello, everybody. Welcome back to training seminar Air Disc Brakes Part 2. The reason I'm saying welcome back, actually, to tell you the truth, I've always wanted to say this, take two. No, all kidding aside, what happened was we just did a lunch and learn last week, was it, Bobby? Yeah, last week. And we had some technical issues in the beginning, and all 400, 500 people that were watching, they were very kind. We lost about 10 minutes of audio and stuff. And but I decided, we're going to do this again. We're going to rerun it, retake this, and Dorman Products, G. Truglia, the one that got me involved with this, and he's a head trainer for Dorman Products. We talked, and he says no problem. And then, once we finish with this recording, you're gonna have it. They'll send it out to all you guys or anybody else that wants it. But again, for last week, I apologize. So we're gonna do it again. Take two. Yeah. So. Thank you again for Dorman Products for allowing me and all of us to do this type of trainings. And every time I do this, everybody does appreciate it when I look at the chat box, and the comments are, need to do more and more of this. So let me get my clicker here and we'll see what kind of trouble we get into, Of course, today's subject's going to be air disc brakes. That's me. That's my address, Don't even worry about it. Even this slide over here, a little bit about me, and every time I do this, I also mention that, it's not this that's important, it's the end result. Once you get through watching this video, hopefully, everything will be hunky-dory and you're going to like what you saw. Eh? I added something here, and I think I did that in a couple of other things I've done with air brakes, but what I wanted to point out is this is disc brakes. And if you notice over here, unfortunately we don't have a live group going on over here. If this was, live group in a classroom, I would be asking everybody, hey, what do you see here? And of course the answer would be back, hey, that's a disc brake. And of course, if you notice, it's nice and clean, nothing's dirty, so it is a newer vehicle. And then I got some close-ups over here too. Nice shiny rotor over here. You got your service chamber over here, caliper and everything, that you saw last week or last part one, you have it over here, But the point I was trying to make also, which I'll get to in a second here, if you look over here, and if I was to ask everybody in a group what is that, everybody most certainly would be pointing out and saying, hey, that's a foot valve. Absolutely a foot valve. But the other thing, and let me get the clicker with this, you'll also notice a lot of red wires over here. And of course, those of you that work on electric vehicles, the first thing that gets into your mind, it should be high voltage. And that's exactly what it is. I snagged some pictures of an electric bus. I've got tons of pictures from tractors and so on. And the only reason I did that is this kind of embracing new technology. And new technology might be your electric portion of the bus vehicle. But to tell you the truth, all these vehicles have to stop. There's no doubt about it. So to make this vehicle stop, whether it's this bus or whatever case may be, it still is taking those mechanical type of brakes, the disc brakes that you saw in the previous slides and so on. You don't have a diesel engine, of course, so it's still, if it's got the brakes on, those disc brakes, that's what we're into right now, it requires air. And yes, these electric vehicles too put out air, okay? And there's a little compressor that does that, okay? And what that compressor is, and you can zoom in a little bit on this one here, this is a scrolled air compressor, direct driven by induction motor, providing a regulated air pressure for the vehicle's air brake system and any accessories requiring compressed air. Okay? No different that you've done throughout the years, forever and ever since George Westinghouse came up with the air system for the trains. The compressor receives filtered air, which is compressed, delivered through air dryer, wet tank pressure sensors, and so on. The only thing, of course, of monitoring the air and everything, that's a little bit more sophisticated, but it's nothing that you guys cannot figure out, all right? So let's see what else we get into. As I mentioned in part one, what we tried to accomplish was I wanted to get you more comfortable with the automatic adjustment feature of any type of an air disc brake system. We covered some Bendix pretty good last time in part one, and the whole idea of this part two is I'm going to dwell a little bit on the Meritor systems, and there are tons of other systems out there, but they all have commonalities, and you'll see just with that Meritor system, that they're very similar to the Bendix ones. Historically, okay, those are the ones we've had forever and ever in the past. And we never wound up kind of getting comfortable with them. They never made it big time into the market. And if you see over here, you got a slack adjuster. Those are external. So you had a slack adjuster, chambers mounted over here, and I'll show you a couple of pictures on that too. But we migrated to the most popular type of air disc brakes that we have out there right now are these direct mounted. You see by here, a lot of internal components type of air disc brake systems. Common with all of them, of course, is with these direct mounted, you have a direct mounted air chamber. You see it over here. Operation adjustment mechanisms are internally housed for resistance against the elements. So those are the selling points with all the manufacturers. Now, this is from Meritor, their EX225. Brake can be installed on any axle, can be used as a service brake only, or of course if you go into the drive axles, service, basically you're going to wind up having it on a steer. But with the parking portion of it with a added spring brake chamber to it, most likely you're going to wind up seeing that on your tandem, your rear drives, and of course your trailers. The operation itself is straightforward. But again, I do hang my hat on that automatic adjuster function. That really is the key on us servicing these brakes. Okay. Air chamber is attached to it. Two slide pins are attached to the brake carrier by slide bolts. And you see them down here, right here. You're going to be sliding up and down. This caliper floats. So torque plate is used to connect the brake carrier to the axle. Caliper housing floats, like I said. You have a bridge that's attached to a caliper assembly, provide the reaction force on the outer pad, and that gives you the clamping force. And if you can go back into your part one, you're fine. You can go back in there and you can revisit this. Little note over here, the caliper and bridge slide on bushings pressed into the caliper housing assembly. What happens is you have on a short slide pin side, the bushing is oval. Not that it's really going to make or break on how we work on these vehicles, but those are kind of nice things to note to accommodate brake deflection during braking. On the long slide pin side, the bushings are round to provide more positive locations for the housing. So basically you have a long side and you have a short side over here. The air chamber attached to caliper housing operates on the operating shaft assembly. And you will see that over here. The force from the chamber, from the service brake chamber, and you see that over here, where it goes in over here. It's going to hit into that little object here, and you'll see it a little better in a minute. Is amplified by geometry of the operating shaft. And what we're talking about, I got into a little bit last time, part one, the geometry of this thing here. It's basically a lever is what it is. Clamping force is transferred to the import pad through half bearing roller tappets, pistons, heads. Force applied to the import pad, it's going to cause a force of reaction. And again, this is where we have, you're fine, I'll move over. This is where you have the clamping effect, and I'll get over, we'll talk about it or walk through it hopefully a little bit again. Slide pins are sealed by the bushing and caps. And you can see that over here. You got a nice little cap here. You got bushings. And that's the whole idea. there is absolutely nothing to grease or lubricate in here, you know. And that by the way, is a good shot by Meritor. And I want to thank Meritor for allowing me to use these slides years ago when I put the disc brake together, you know. When the brakes are released, the clamping force is released. The return spring returns the clamping mechanism and operating shaft back to the start position. The big thing with these things, and hopefully I'll get that across when we do a little bit of, you know, adjusting and stuff, the pads are now at a defined, designed running clearance to the rotor. And that concept, you can, again, recheck it in part 1. Okay? So we're back into this automatic adjustment again. The automatic adjuster is utilized, adjust brake pad to rotor clearance. That does compensate for pad work. Upon brake application, you're stepping on the brake. The system senses whether adjustment is required or not. And I'll actually do that here a little bit, or make an attempt to do it. So if the running clearance is within a built-in tolerance, no adjustment will occur. The built-in tolerance, that is a design clearance between the ball and the drive pin that is rigidly fixed to the operating shaft fork on end. So basically in this sentence it says here, you will do the adjustments, okay, but you will not be responsible that I can possibly maybe over-adjust it, stuff like that, and I'll walk into that a little bit, you know. You have a manual adjustment, de-adjustment, you'll see that over here. Okay. Just like the Bendix and the majority of vehicles, makers out there have the same thing. Manual adjustment brake should only be made at a pad change. Manual adjuster stem runs in constant mesh with the gear form, on the outside tappets. End of this stem comes out from the brake housing. Of course, it's sealed too, you know, and typically, you know, you're going to have covers on there. Let me back up on this. I'm not sure what I want to show first. Okay. I'm going to bring this over here and then it'll make sense a little bit. So if you want to, this is a typical Meritor over here. And I'm going to make an attempt, you know, we'll spend a few minutes here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull my pad and rotor assembly out. You know, it's a cheap one. Okay. Little reminder, as long as we're here and we're facing it this way, if you notice, I'm turning this tappet here. This is just a little reminder, when you get these things apart, make sure this is free, because if this is bound in here, and as this comes out, it's threaded, you'll see it in there a little bit, as this comes out, okay, you're going to get some binding, because you're going to have forces against the pad over here. Okay? But what I wanted to do here was, I'm going to spin it around a little, and not enough room. Okay. You got a pretty good shot here, okay? And I'll try to stay out of the way over here. I'm going to back this off first, okay? Actually, I'm going to tighten it. Nah, I'm going to back it off. I'm going to back it off so you can see, you know, that I can move this. It's a simple case. I push on the rod, okay, and my pistons will come out, okay. So what I'm going to do now is, where did I put my wrench? I'm going to tighten this. And that's a nice feeling when you're able to do this, okay. So I'm actually almost there. I'm pretty tight over here. This is what I want you to see. As I'm going out like this, okay, I'm just going to keep pushing this. Okay? What's going to happen now here is I'm not tight, and there's a reason for it. This is tightening this way. If you notice, I went out. The reason it went out, I had no force stopping it. Okay? However, if I put my block in here over here and now tighten it up, okay, I should say I'm bringing it to it. partially to save us time. I didn't tighten it all the way to the pads. I'm going to do the same thing. Now, as I got closer to the pad, I can actually feel the force over here. All right? So basically what's going to happen is with doing that, I can actually, of course, back up all the way. But my point being is I needed that force over here all day long. So let me real fast show you the video of what was going on over here. Now this is what you're seeing. This was what I was actually doing here. You can see the pistons coming out. Every time I pushed in, they were getting tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. And they'll only come to a certain point, and they're not going to get any much tighter in there. It automatically found that designed, predetermined adjustment, that clearance that winds up being so important. Now, let's get into the maintenance end of it. One of the things I often talk about when I talk about this disc brakes is that window of opportunity to try to see if we have some issues, when is the time to change our pads, and so on and so on. Now, this is from Meritor, okay? This is their recommendation, fleet chassis lubrication schedule. And when I'm talking about checking this system, I'm talking about actually pulling the wheels off and looking down on the pads to get a very clear view of what is going on. I mentioned the chassis lubrication schedule at least 4 times during the lining life. That's a determination you're going to have to make. And I truly hang my hat on this tire replacement here. Because I got to tell you, the second portion of this, once we get done with Meritor, I want to really highlight the issues that we have out there. And a lot of them are related to be able to do inspection of these systems, you know, and it's a little bit harder than it is with your drum S-cam brakes, but we'll get to that. The reason I highlighted that at tire replacement is these things do wear. They're mechanical. We're going up and down the road. Pads wear. A lot of times you have dust shields on. You can't see the rotors. So we wind up with having issues. Components fail. Calipers freeze up and everything else. If this was my fleet or my shop, to be honest with you, I would probably put a order out that if anybody pops a tire, you know, even if it's not even a scheduled tire change, to be honest with you, it comes in, had a flat tire, low tire, whatever the case may be, you know, I would have somebody call me or a technician over and say, hey, listen, I got a tire off. You want to take a peek down in there? Because I'll be very honest with you, there's your opportunity to look at that, you know, breaking it into these intervals that maybe something went wrong in between these other intervals. And, you know, again, that's why I hang my hat at tire replacement. The other thing I did was when I put this stuff together, I absolutely go into the manufacturer's manuals and stuff and get a good grasp. I'm one of those, I like taking things apart and working on them all day long. I want to get very, very comfortable with whatever system I work with, you know. But I've noticed in all these systems, they try to utilize a dial indicator. And when I do my live classes over here in the classroom or out of the area, you know, throughout New York State, one of the questions when I do the disc brake module is, how many guys actually put a dial indicator to check for running clearance and so on? And I really haven't found anybody that says, yes, I do. The majority of people do not use dial indicators. And it's nice, you know, if you have the time to do that. I mean, you can get very precise, but those of you watching this, you know, in the real world, you're over there, you got to make some decision. Do I have an issue? I need to move on. Because when these trucks are sitting there, the loads aren't being moved, chances are pretty good that guy's got close to $200,000 invested in that truck. He needs to have it on the road. And of course today with the shortages and all that stuff, it's really become very important that we have a smooth running machine, meaning the fleet, the driver, everybody working together. So what I did was I took some of the dial indicator figures, like for example 78 thousandths, and I kind of walked through it. And if you notice, hey, what's 1/8 of an inch? Turn it from fractional to digital. So whatever makes me happy or you happy, to whatever clicks in your head. And I ultimately wound up that, right here, 1/16 of an inch, I'm happy with that. Okay, that's about the thickness of a nickel. Because the thing I'm going to harp about in with the next quite a few slides is you got to take that chamber, because that's the easiest place to grab it, and you got to try to move that caliper. Okay, and we'll get into that in a short. And this is a perfect example. CVS applied stroke. You don't have a CVS applied stroke because you don't have a push rod. So it's not like with your S-drum brakes, S-cam drum brakes, where you have the slack adjuster, you got a push rod. If you got a type 30 chamber, for example, if it's standard, readjustment limit 2 inches. If it's a long stroke, readjustment limit 2.5 inches. And of course, you want it lower than that, that you're at your limit there. But however, with the disc brakes, you don't have that provision. So what you want to do with the disc brakes is you're trying to measure the running clearance with a dial indicator. And that's what you're looking for. Well, just think about it. Why are you doing this? Why are you looking at? You got your dial indicator on that. This has an automatic slack adjuster. Excuse me, I'm so hung up on drum brakes. This has the automatic adjusting system in there. You want to make sure that everything's working correct. You want to make sure the caliper isn't froze. So I'll give you an example. So forget about this guy here with the dial indicator. You grab this. I want to get that 1/16 of an inch movement. If I get, and I'm going to exaggerate here, guys, okay? If I get, like, for example, 3/8 half-inch movement, like I said, I'm exaggerating. That tells me, is my automatic adjuster system working properly? No, it hasn't kept up. It hasn't provided us with the defined clearance that was built into the system. So consequently, that's the easy way to check that. What if I grab this thing and I try to move it and it isn't budging at all? Couple of options here. Maybe it over adjusted, which I very rarely, Murphy's Law, stuff can happen, but usually that is a good indicator I have a binding caliper. Okay, and that is issues out there, and we'll get into some more slides and videos on that. Again, you have this thing. You have. I'm sure you downloaded the handouts. Those of you that went through the first round when we had the digital clutch, walks you right through that. Dial indicator should be taken from Central Park, and so on and so on. Okay? If the caliper slides more than 8 thousandths, out of adjustment, requires further inspection. But that's my take. Now, what Meritor did with this thing, the Bendix has a nice provision for with the notches. Meritor did it a little bit differently. So I'm going to bring this around over here. And I'll probably do a side view of this thing. Actually, we'll look at it both ways. If you notice over here, and I painted it white, there is a spring, okay? And it's basically attached, okay? It's attached to this bridge over here, kind of, okay? It floats in there. The spring keeps this little rod, kind of wedged between there so nothing drops out. Because I can actually move this little thing here, But what happens is, now, if you can look closely, I'm going to move this thing. When I have full pads on here, everything is nice. You can see this caliper actually moved that way. Okay, back up just a little bit. Bobby, back up just a little bit. Yeah. You can see this is my floating movement. No different than Bendix does. Okay, and you can see my little spring getting compressed in here. So now, if my pads are new, rotor is new and everything, this is about the position that caliper is going to be in. So I'm going to flip this over, okay, bring it around this way, and you can see the external portion of the rod. There it is. Now as my pads get worn, the pistons are going to start coming out. This is floating. The caliper is going to come closer, closer. Piston goes out. If you notice, I'm seeing less and less and less and less of that rod. So basically, and I painted it white, made it easy for me. I guess probably I'm happy if I see it about 1/16 of an inch. What that tells me, I don't have illegal pads in there, but however, that's the point in time that I want to pop the wheel off, and I want to take a much better look at this thing. Okay? That's why I figured I might as well, I'm one of those, I like the touchy-feely thing. And before I forget, well, I'll do that later. When I get to the Bendix, I'm going to bring the Bendix around a little bit later too. So again, pads are new and the stem will protrude past the edge of housing. As the pad wears, less an indicator will be visible past the edge. So that is a very nice way of trying to see. And the WAPCOs have the notches like Bendix too. So we're back to the same thing. You know, get comfortable with your manufacturer. You know, this is showing you again, you know, same thing, repetition. Here I am doing my adjustments and stuff. We'll get into that. Checking for proper adjustment. De-adjust the brake. You put your 10mm wrench on it. Rotate the adjuster stem 1/4 turn, counterclockwise. Leave the wrench on. Okay. Actuate the brake one time. If the wrench rotates clockwise, okay, upon the actuation, adjuster mechanism is working correctly. If it does not, you're going to have an issue. It's an indicator of issue. The adjuster mechanism is not working correctly. And of course, ultimately, that calls for a pad replacement, caliper replacement. You know, would life be that simple? Yeah. This is a good picture. It always gets the point across. The first few slides showed you that it was a very sealed unit. And if everything stays sealed, we should have no issues. But that's not always a possibility. For example, if this wasn't sealed correctly, if somebody changed the chamber, didn't bother sealing this, okay, if the boot caps, you know, if the boots come off of your tappets, off your bushings and stuff, we're gonna have problems. But for the sake of this here, this right here, okay, this is where you're really going to wind up taking a chance of getting water and all sorts of stuff here. You know, like I said, I'm from the Western New York area, and let's think about this. I mean, no matter where you are in the country, you relate to our area, snow, salt, you name it, whatever they kick out on the roads and stuff. So basically, you know where I'm going with this. Those of you that live in our northeast areas, you know, our work is cut out for us, you know. But regardless, that moisture and stuff gets in there. And of course, this is where we're going to wind up having, you know, issues, you know, your threaded pistons, they'll freeze up, the internal components, they'll seize up and so on. And, you know, so that's so important, you know. With pads removed, visually inspect the piston boots. Okay? And again, right here, you notice this is not correct. She's off of here. You want to make sure that they're always on. You know, another area of concern. Not only are you looking at the pistons that you're looking down, but keep in mind too that the sliders have boots over here too. Okay? Cautions, warnings, notes, tips. So if the manual adjuster does not rotate in either direction, replace the caliper assembly. Replace the pads on both brakes of a single axle or all four on a tandem axle at the same time to prevent a performance issue. Install the pads with the friction material facing the rotor. That actually happens on rear. I'm not trying to be a wise guy, but I've gotten vehicles in, and I get it. Sometimes people get in a hurry, but common sense does have to, prevail. You must adjust initial brake pad to rotor clearance to prevent damage to components. Do not use grease to aid in installing the boots. Okay, you don't want deterioration and any grease is eating into them. And I mean, they gotta fit their type by themselves. I just took a sip of my coffee real fast. Rotor has to be replaced if it reaches minimum discard dimension. Apply Loctite to hub to rotor new bolts. Tighten hub to rotor bolts in a crisscross, just like it did with the wheels, same thing. Always install an air chamber with a correct piston. This is where, RTIF, make sure, read the instructions, excuse me, or really rely on your parts guy. Make sure that if you're purchasing, for example, chamber stuff, let them know what the application is, okay? So, for example, the Disc Plus uses a, 0.59-inch chamber standout length. I'm just throwing that out there, guys. If breather plugs are supplied on chamber, locate the bottommost, remove it from the chamber. It only makes sense. Let that moisture fall down. Let it go down. Unfortunately, we're in the type of environment where we do get all that. Basic troubleshooting. So you get a complaint, brake seem to drag on it. Of course, the brake drags, your indication is, wow, I'm getting some excessive wear in the pads, rotor, and so on. Possible causes: incorrect initial adjustment, spring or service brake not releasing, incorrect pad to rotor clearance, vehicle air system issues such as valves, reduced brake lining life, refer to brake drag above. I already mentioned that. Always keep in mind the vehicle overload. This system was designed to carry X amount of tons. Why are you exceeding it? It's like trying to put 10 pounds of doo-doo in a 5-pound pail. Doesn't always work. Caliper stick and slide pins are totally seized. Balance issue. Companion brakes are not. Basically, this is always when I do my actual regular brake courses, I really harp on the balance. So if you have a steer axle, you got your steer axle, you got two tandem axles. So if one of them is not doing its share of work, because this is a heat machine, if the one wheel's not doing its work, what are the other wheels going to do? Because you're still trying to stop, aren't you? They're going to heat up more, okay? The basic concept of any brake system is each wheel has to do its share of work. No ifs and buts about it. If it doesn't, this is where we're going to have contributing issues to the whole brake system as far as braking performance. Poor stopping power, vehicle pulls to one side. Vehicle air system, contaminate linings or rotors, imbalanced brake system, brakes out of adjustment, And of course, if you're talking with drum brakes, S-cam, first thing comes in your mind right away, oh, my pushrod stroke. Keep in mind, you don't have a pushrod stroke over here, okay? So you're going to have to look at other areas, incorrect pad to rotor clearance. What I did, I just, put the slide backwards a little, brake noises, possible causes, warm brakes. Brake noises, if you're in your truck or tractor, chances are pretty good you're here, but if that trailer is way on the other end, you're going down the road, you got to have some pretty sharp ears to hear it. But of course, that does happen. You can contribute that to warm brake pads not moving freely in the caliper. Of course, this is we're back to good maintenance practices over here. When you put those pads in, are you checking to make sure that they're free, or are you taking a hammer and you're pounding the pads in there? Incorrect pads installed, bent or loose retainer, brake component attachments are not installed properly and are not specs. Of course, rotor issues, crack, excessive run out. This is still an air system, even though you have a disc brake system here all day long. Okay, Because one of the issues that we have out there is when these things first came out, guys would go underneath there, peek underneath, and they're, oh, disc brakes. Man, this is awesome. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to check the push rod stroke, whole bunches of stuff, that I don't have to look for worn slack adjusters and everything else, pins, clevises missing, and so on. Guys, gals, this is still a brake system. You have a lot of components here. So if you need to get into that routine, you need to still check for leaks, hoses, diaphragms, because you still have a chamber over here. The fittings, look at the fittings you have over here. Check the hoses condition. Think about where they're running over here. A lot of it, like with the placement, it's one of those like since somebody worked on it last, somebody changed the chamber, somebody changed the hose. They didn't They didn't fasten it properly. They didn't keep it away from areas where they can chafe and touch and so on. Check for leaks, oil, grease. There's still oil and grease in that hub over here. You have a hub and you have a seal. My point being is just because it's a disc brake system doesn't give you the, let me word it a little bit, you should still do your preventive maintenance, This does wind up being an issue over here. And this is a shot from kind of underneath there. This is what you see when you're on your creeper over there. You do not have a good window of opportunity to see anything. Okay? And in the environment, everything is rusty. Everything does get worn. Okay? And I call it the limited window of opportunity. You can just barely see the pad over here. You can see the hub with the toner ring over here. Those of you that work on car brakes, you have the same issue. If you do annual inspections, for example, you know how hard it is. The vehicle comes in. It's your responsibility to make a decision. Do you have enough pad lining left in there? Okay, pad life, whatever way you want to look at it. Is the rotor in a passable condition, or is it worn? Does it have cracks and so on? And it's so hard if you just can't see into it, And a lot of state laws with the cars, they require you to pull a wheel. The reason you do that, so at a minimum you pull one wheel to see the condition of all these components. Now, I'm going to deviate from this a little bit right here, okay? I want to get more into regulatory thing just to prove a point how hard it is to see some of these issues here. Okay? And while we're doing that, Bobby, I'm going to shut this down. What you heard was a little beep, and I always get into a little bit of like I should have kind of put it into a do not disturb. Okay, now we're not going to be disturbed, hopefully. What I do is I do a lot of regulation stuff. So I happen to the beginning of this year, and we're going to try to hone in a little bit here. I'm not going to look at the whole thing. I just need you to see on the top. And basically, if you look on the top, I highlighted it. Okay, these are actual kind of every violation that was recorded in this country. I believe it was from looks like right up to 2019 to 2023. And if you see, it says the total number of inspections. Just think about that. Put this into perspective. Over 12 million. Total number of violations, over 20 million. And of course, the vehicles that were put out of service, 3,591,000, blah, blah, blah. But I want you to look on top. If you look in the blue, violation description, violation code, and most of them that I'm going to pick on are in the 393.47. They're the brake section. Okay? But if you notice, you see the number inspection, number of violations, that blue column, number total violations, number out of service, 0%. So let me start from the beginning, okay? This was column 1, and you see over inoperative required lamp. I'm only using that as an example. And you'll see over there the number of inspections performed, okay? And then you see the number of violations and so on. Now, I'm going to skip into a page that is related to the brakes. Now, I'm not going to go through this whole thing, okay? So if we highlight this thing over here, I'm going to bring it up over here. Can you see it good, Bobby? Okay. So over here, 393.48, brake rotor, metal to metal contact. Number of inspections, 446. Number of violations, and so on. Of course, most certainly that's an out of service violation. Okay. I just wanted to say a point. Now, progressively, the way it works is that each column winds up being with less and less and less and less violations and inspections, you know, just the way they did it. So I want to pick, I highlighted this. Okay. Now, and the reason I'm doing this, I'm finding an issue out there with this brake system, and this is why I'm kind of adamant on what I'm doing. If you see over here, air disc brake contaminate friction surface on steer axle. And let me bring this down again on that blue. Number of inspections, 1. Number of violations, 1. Okay. Out of service, 100%. And you see the same thing, air disc brake. Okay. Uncontaminate 111, okay, and so on and so on. Look at that. Lining pad thickness less than 16 inches. Number of inspections, 1. Okay? Number of violations, 1. That is kind of alarming. Okay, the reason it's alarming is that if I'm reading this correctly, they were able to see only one I guess inspection where they were able to see the pads is the way I'm reading it. And somebody found a violation. Now think about all the previous whatever had the millions and millions of inspections done. The majority of drum brakes, easy to find. Because if I went into the 393.47 on those violations, they're into thousands, okay, with the rotors, with the drums and stuff. The point I'm trying to make is, now I live in the real world and I get these disc brakes coming in, and all the time I'm finding issues, okay? And that's what I'm trying to cover with this thing. This is why we're doing what we're doing. Again, and I get it on the roadside, that window of opportunity, but we need to do something because we need to catch some of this stuff. Even us guys, when we do annual inspections, it's not that easy. Now on the Bendix, remember we talked about that little notch over here when they come together. This is a perfect sample. That's the time to remove that wheel and take a look at your pads so you can actually look down, you know, from the top on down and look at the condition, look at the rotors and all that stuff. Okay? And it's always nice if somebody's got a vehicle that, hey, look at this. Nice paint, the paint lasted for a long time, it's easy for me to see the notches. But that's not the case all the time. Now, I'm going to show you this real fast. Bendix, for example, came up with a nice little tool, and I'll bring this over. Okay. So if you remember, part 1, I did cover Bendix quite a bit, okay? But what happens is, and I'm going to try to zoom in, or you might have to, we'll play games, you have to zoom out or zoom in or something. This notch over here, okay, this will fit on the rotor, on top of the rotor, you know, I can flip it, I guess, you know. It fits on here, and it very accurately gives you the discard limit or rotor thickness. So if you slide this back and forth, loosen my thumbnails here a little bit, they're tight. So if I slide this, I don't know how good you can see this. So as my rotor gets worn, and I'll just pick a spot over here, okay? Rotor thickness. And you can see over here, you can see my markings here. But the big thing here, of course, is we're talking about trying to see the pads. So what Bendix did, okay, And I'll show you. You get this little tool here, okay? And I go down in here and I go against the pad over here. Okay? I go against the pad and I pull this out. Let me get a good spot here. It's not always as easy. But the bottom thing, if you squeeze in there, you hit the pad, and I got everything out of the way. Okay? Damn it. I'm about ready to rip it off. And you put this against the housing here. And I'll show you. Can you follow me, or can you see that, Polly? Okay, so I put that here. So now my pads are fairly new. At a minimum, without me pulling the wheel, and I'll put this up again, if you can come over here, zoom in over here, okay? And this is the portion here. This is the portion that I was moving in and out. So if you see that notch over here, if you can't see it good, pad material remaining 100%, 75%, 50%, and so on. At least it gives you, and depending on the other side, it actually gives you guidance. The numbers are pretty near the same, but it also winds up with an arrow right there. Okay? So this says wheels off, inspection required. And of course, when you're worn so bad over here, which is like, nothing, and I'll get into that. If you notice over here, CBSA out of service limit. Okay? So at a minimum, you're able to get in here, as long as I got this here. When I did number one, that's break one, after I got done, we had a nice chat after it, okay? And then, back off a little bit, just so everybody say. Somebody asked you, what was this thing you were doing here? So I told him I'd slow it down a little, okay? And what this is a screwdriver, cheap one, by the way, okay? And I welded a U-clamp to it, okay? And you can see it over here. There's a U-clamp here. I'll hold it straight if I can. I welded a little nut here for leverage. So basically what I wound up doing, if you guys remember, it made it convenient for me, okay, to push this down, okay? So then you can see, I'm not going to take it apart, but you can see I moved the pin real easy, floats in and out. Yes, on most of them, you can do this, okay? But you know what? If you can work easy, work easy. So it's one of those homemade tools. So I promised everybody I would show that to them. All right. So let's get back to the PowerPoint. By the way, I'm not trying to sell stuff. This is not my job. But I believe I got mine. I went online and I got mine on good old Amazon Prime, whatever the case may be, okay? Installation instructions, for it. They weren't that pricey, but they work pretty good. And you can see it over here. Same thing I tried to show over here. And unfortunately, this is your window of opportunity. Eh? You zoom in on that so they can see it, This is what you want, guys. That's what I started out this presentation with. Remember, with the dial indicator, get in the habit of every time a vehicle comes in, move that chamber. That's your first thing that you should do, Now, wheels are off. This is great. That's what you want. Your wheels are off. Make sure you get full movement. That's not good, guys. That is barely moving, if at all. It's going to be a very expensive day for that customer, That is not good, guys. And that's what I'm talking about. You have all these violations that I talked to you about, all the inspections, millions and millions of inspections, and this is what I live with. And those of you that work on fleets that are watching, you're going through the same thing. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Eh? If you notice over here, the pad is dropping out. Just like you would on hydraulic brakes, those of you that work on that stuff all day long. And you can see the scrape marks in here. And you know that's occurred for a long, long time. Do you realize how worn these pads had to get? I'll be very honest with you, they got so worn that probably there is no lining left, and it allowed them to drop down. And of course, we're back to the window of opportunity. This is a no-brainer, guys. This is a no-brainer, replacing this. But you're not going to replace it unless you catch this. Look at that. You have a dust shield on the other side. What if from the other side, the condition of the rotor isn't like this? And you're looking just for a little window on the other side as you're turning the rotor, if you're even turning it, to look for cracks. This is my world. This is your world. This is my world. This is your world. This is not uncommon, everybody. If you have, this is your first exposure to that, and that's my whole point, is we're missing the boat here someplace. Now, this is another tool that I have. I think I did that on my part 1. You can stay there, Bobby. I'll bring that over here. Yeah. I try to make a point with this. I have this tool here. That's what you're looking at over there. I have this marked right here with disc brake, and you notice this is nice to get in there. I have another one marked for drum brakes. Okay, so what I did was I found the dimension. It was 1/4 inch, and this is what I'm not happy about. The federal regulations with the 1/8 of an inch. That's so stupidly ridiculous. It's unbelievable, but I'm not the guy writing the regulations. What do I know? But what happens is I have, of course, different thicknesses. You can see here. Sometimes I'm able to get into, more so, of course, with the drum brakes. I can slide in, and I can make a better decision. How much life is left, am I at the limit, and so on. But I wanted to utilize this disc brake, this 1/8 of an inch here, to prove a point here with the regulations. So what I do with my clicker, I got it, Bobby. I found it. You should have been keeping tabs of that. You know how I am. My wife has to dress me when I come to. Never mind. But anyway, here's a worn pad. Look at the side over here. There's nothing left here. This is your limit. 1/8 of an inch limit. Are you kidding me? I guess maybe the point I'm trying to make is, if we're utilizing 1/4 of an inch for drum brakes, why the hell aren't we doing the same with this? Because again, in the real world, those of you that pop these wheels, that replace these pads all day long, you could have an 1/8 of an inch on one side, and the rest of it is like crap that's metal to metal. I'm just trying to make a point on regulations. Again, sometimes we need to do things differently. And these linings do come off the pads, just like you see it on drum brakes. All that stuff internally doesn't change. We've had problems with drum brakes. We still have problems with these. The rotor, of course. Rotors are a pain in the butt to change. Okay? Everybody has a little bit of a reluctancy. You might stretch this a little bit farther versus your drum brakes. Usually if you have any inclination of a bad drum on a drum S-cam brake, for the cost what you have for drums today, I'm not even going to get into it. I don't even hesitate. If I have any issues at all, and they look bad, just doing a visual, new drums go on it all day long. Well, there's a little hesitancy with these guys here because of the work involved. Okay, it can be very, very labor intensive, and a lot of times, if you zoom in over here, by the way, if this is your first exposure, Okay? You do have like discard limits marked on all these thicknesses, 1.46, and they tend to be the same on all of them. You know, you don't have to zone in on them. You know, this is a new rotor. It's nice. This type here, realizing that there has been an issue trying to put them on, okay, they've changed the configuration here. Your replacement rotor in this, they made it a little bit easier. You know, everybody, you know, once you have some problems like anything else, let me see if I have a better way of doing this. And of course, you get the mounting bolts and so on. The bottom line here too is always, I'm not trying to be a wise guy, you know, and you don't even have to zoom in here, Bobby. This is a RTFI. Read the freaking instruction. You know, it goes step 1 before installing, make sure the spline section is free of any dirt. All common stuff. Sense stuff, okay? Remove the ABS ring hub manufacturers, follow the, if necessary, remove the ABS ring per hub manufacturer's recommendations, you know. Step 2, place rotor in position. It goes on and on and on and on. But that's step 3, hand tighten 10 bolts. Use a calibrated torque wrench and tighten the bolts to 22 foot-pounds. You know, so don't just take stuff out of the packages, go in there and then just put them in and okay, I'm tight. You know, follow directions. Don't forget, it's a commercial motor vehicle. The liability is a little bit different than it would be with cars. So now, I have found, and I've been doing it quite a few years, and some of the parts places are starting to stock them more and more. But I have found that I can, depending on, you know, how much labor it is to do those rotors, I'm farther ahead if I can locate or purchase a hub rotor assembly all put together over here. Just think about it. Is it going to be more expensive than that rotor we played with that I held up in my hand? Absolutely, absolutely. But you are walking away with new bearings, new seal, the hub ridge over here that once in a while electrolysis takes place right here, and your drum drops, especially if it's aluminum hub, it wants to drop down, you don't even realize it, and then you get a little bit of a shaking over there. Okay? Regardless though, you're getting all these new components, everything's pre-torqued, you know, put the hub on, look at your adjusting nut, locking nut, it tells you whatever it is, 400 pounds, or if you have to take certain steps or whatever, it's already done. They're pre-loaded. And now your customer or your fleet or your vehicle that you own, you're going to wind up with everything new. And I'll give you a perfect sample. I did that. I've got into discussion in a few places, few fleets and shops, and especially fleets. And the guy, you know, that's quite a little bit more than a rotor. Is let the guys work. I says, well, you're paying them the time. You're hammering on this stuff. Time moves on, hour by hour by hour, and you guys that have to do this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I've had them come back, you know, 2-3 weeks later, I get a call, you know what, I started to rethink about it, and I went out there and I got some, and you're right. I'm really money ahead, you know. And with the cost, a lot of this stuff too, I mean, some company says, you know what, I'm going to put these hubs on. Then if there's a slow period in the shop or something, then maybe I'll have the guys mess around and knock the rotor off. But it does make quite a bit of sense over here, you know. There's your notches again. Only reason I wanted to show that is that one Prius one was nice painted. Of course, my displays are nicely painted. In the real world, you go underneath there, you might have to scrape and look for these notches. Okay? And there it is again. But, like I said, doesn't this look clean? New hub, new everything. You know, you're doing a guy a favor. Because ultimately, that's old naturally, you know, that definitely is real world. Look at all the rust and stuff. But I'm going to stop here for a second, just so you know, just because your vents are getting a little bit of rusty and stuff, that rotor might be in pretty good shape, and you might want to make a decision. You know what, this guy, doesn't want to spend that much money. He's already kind of like thinking twice about having disc brakes, because some of the issues he's had in the past. I have no qualms. Once I get the pads and stuff out, get a chipping hammer or something, knock this stuff out, spin it around, let the stuff come down, get a blowgun or whatever. The surfaces are nice, but taking that extra 5 minutes with each rotor, at least I'm providing a means of the air still circulating through those vents over there. Plus, it also gives me a chance to inspect them, because I have seen them where these vents get so rusty and corroded, and that's the weak spot over here. You see the bridge over here. What happens if these start cracking through? And then one of these days, that rotor is going to kind of like spin a little bit, so. Do not turn pistons out so far that they rotate out of the housing. You want to be a nice guy, you're turning the pistons out over there. Remember, you're taking the wrench, you're de-adjusting it, you're adjusting it out. Make sure you get moving. Be careful. If you put them out, now this is with the pads out, you go beyond, for example, the Meritor 2.5 inch, Bendix inch and 3/4, okay? And if that pops out of there like that, you're done. Because you're not capable of, I shouldn't say you're not capable, you're capable of putting back in. But the problem you're going to have is, are you able to sync the two pistons, threaded pistons together? If you think you can't, and you probably won't, would you really want that liability? And this is why they say losing that synchronizing mechanism, you might just get a caliper. And that's what I'm talking about over here, 2.5 inch and a half. And I mentioned that, Webb, Dayton aftermarkets, they all have that. They're really, doing the same thing. They're actually, like, for example, if this is a Bendix caliper done by Webb or Dayton, I'm assuming all the specs are the same. So that's the only thing I'm trying to point out there. And this is on a Bendix. You can hear click, 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 click going back, right? And you can see the pistons coming in. That's sweet music, sweet motion. It's good for the customer. That means so far, everything's internally not bad, in that even though it looks cruddy, this is a good sign for it that you're able to back it out. Because those are shear adapters, and if that shear adapter breaks, you got issues. And of course, I harp on that movement. Make sure these things move. Grab them, move them, all day long, Perfect. And the only reason I still kept the pads in here, like we did an inspection, you notice up here, the pad really has, I don't know, it's kind of like if it was a drum brake, I would say, you had some pretty good life left. This is about 1/4 inch, to be honest with you. But when I get it down to point, those pads are going to come out, all day long, I mean, who wants to bother with the wheels off and everything? And you can see the difference over here, Quick tips: surface rust on rotor can indicate an issue. Excessive differences between inboard outboard pads can indicate it. Look, so far, this is no different than what you guys do with hydraulic brakes. Bendix got the recommendations here. Replace when they reach 0.433 inches. Bendix rotors, and I read that off for you. When they're new, you want them 1.46 inches. So all that information is there. Another quick tip: Bendix adjuster not rotating. I already mentioned it. If second shear adapter breaks while turning counterclockwise, the adjuster is seized. There's only one remedy: replace the caliper. Quick check for running clearance binding. Remember, I says just grab it in movement. Okay. If you do that, you're probably doing more than anybody else out there. Meritor, if adjuster does not rotate either direction, replace the caliper. All manufacturers, if you're going to replace guide seals, boots, make sure you have proper tools. And to be very honest with you, this is why, if you were looking to do the bushings and boots and so on, you can get into some mega bucks. You have to figure out, is it worth your while? Is it worth your while to spend thousands of dollars on tools, Right now, if you were to go out and try to get those components, bushings and everything else, chances are pretty good a lot of the aftermarket park places or the park places you go to, doesn't matter, whether it be a dealer, they're really not stocking those components, okay? The other thing too is, would you really want the liability of you putting that together, The issue is, just think about it this way. If you overhaul an engine and stuff, is it devastating if you missed a step or if something didn't work or if the engine blows, whatever the case may be? Absolutely, it's devastating. However, that engine isn't necessarily utilized to stop that vehicle. The brakes have to stop that vehicle. If there's ever an accident, if there's a fatality, and this vehicle doesn't have the proper stopping distances, or a driver comes out on a post and starts complaining, well, the vehicle wasn't stopping correctly, I had a pull here, I had this, and a investigator comes in and starts looking at it, and this is, again, we're in a commercial motor industry here. I want to see your maintenance records. I want to see who did what, where, how, when, and all that stuff. And you guys know where I'm going with this. So again, are there some areas that we should maybe, again, it's not that you can't do that, but we're back, does it make sense to do it? But if you do, keep in mind you still have to change your major components, caliper to anchor plate bolt torque. That's huge, guys. 350, 400, RTFI, RTFB, Meritor 450. And don't use this. This is, I'm going to tell you right now, always go in, I'm giving you some ideas, okay? These are plucked out of these guys, but you definitely need to get into the specific, materials for that specific manufacturer. This is a Hendrickson suspension. Like I said, everybody gets into this, We know who the main players are, but we have so many of the other guys get into it. The only reason I want to mention is, again, and this wasn't that old. If you look on the side of the rotor here, okay, yeah, of course you got some rust on it, but the previous slides I showed you were, my gosh, look at all the rust. So this isn't that old. However, this had an ABS code come in. And if I put my straight edge across here, look at that. Look how far this is sticking out. You can see the gap underneath here. What happened? Okay. Rust got in there prematurely. Okay. And it jacked or raised that toner out of the pocket where it goes in, okay? It affected the seating of the toner ring, So the bottom line is, we do wind up having issues, everybody. Listen, I don't know, I probably went over on this one with a re-recording. It's a good thing, it doesn't hurt at all. So, because if it gets passed on to you, you're most certainly, the nice thing, I guess, doing this type of stuff is you can walk away, go have a cup of coffee after you put it on pause, go back, or do it in increments. But hopefully, just being a simple lunch and learn, I really truly hope you guys walked away with something. When I did the live one, there was a lot of kind of on the chat box, everybody was very, very gracious, and I really do appreciate that, about, hey, let's keep this going, let's do more stuff. I'm going to migrate slowly but surely more into other areas. I've done so far, I believe, Air Brake 101. I've done some regulatory stuff, doing the disc brakes right now. And some of the guys asked about ABS, so I'm pretty sure for my next lunch and learn, I'm going to do a 1 hour thing on ABS, because ABS is another one of those areas. When I do driver trainings, I'll give you an example, and this is not on a reflection, or I don't want anybody taking this personally, but these are the guys that on the roadside, they get the violations, and when they get pulled over and everything else, and if there's an ABS issue, of course, the first thing they're going to spot is that light either on the dash or the light on the back of the trailer when they're looking out over there, But they'll take it into the shop, and you know, of course, by the next duty change, it needs to be fixed if it was a violation on the road. So the drivers will pick it up. The light is out. Of course, you know, one big thing that they bitch about is 2 hours into the run, the light is back on again. It just goes on and on. And what I want to do with that ABS, I'm going to try to make it quite simple. But of course, ABS is electrical, so this might be a perfect vehicle to move into and start migrating towards electrical stuff in there. I'm gonna cut this off. Okay, I started this video here, this Lunch and Learn, talking about the disc brakes, you know, on electric vehicles and stuff. And ironically, you know, trying to stay on top of everything, this artificial intelligence seems to be cropping up more and more and more and more. I don't want to get into, I mean, I can spend hours even on that, you know, looking at all aspects of it. But today I kind of ran across, and it had nothing to do with per se our trucking or automotive industry. And it was one of those little charts somebody had put together. They gathered data from all over and looked at kind of what's expected when artificial intelligence really starts coming into play. And I got to tell you guys, I'm starting to see more and more and more and more companies, manufacturers, and so on, industries, different industries, really playing around with it on the premise that eventually artificial intelligence can replace a lot of people, can do the job faster, blah, 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 and all this stuff. But getting back to the chart, guys, I was so glad to see that on the bottom of the chart, it started up on top. The industries that could get impacted the most, to be very honest with you, was like, for example, the chart had lines like this. People that were in offices, people that had to do a lot of data stuff and retrieving and everything else. And then it slowly worked slower and slower and slower and slower down. And then it got to a line that had to do with people that worked with their hands, that had to do manual work. This is us, guys. Okay, people that actually have to go in there and work on the stuff that we're covering over here. They're going to be the least impacted with artificial intelligence. So I just wanted to point that out, because the point I'm also trying to make is, guys, your jobs, if you're doing it correctly, if we all work at it together, provide a safe industry, our jobs are secure. It's going to be very hard to replace you, all you people watching here, including myself, because that artificial intelligence ain't going to jump out of the computer, ain't going to hop on that vehicle, ain't going to go under and crawl underneath that vehicle, get dirty and greasy, and try to make a decision. Oh, look at it, I got antifreeze came out of my plug, this and blah, 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 everything we did. So I'm going to leave that off over there. Let artificial intelligence do whatever it wants. Guys, keep your feet to the ground, keep your nose to the grinder, and we're going to make it. Thank you again.